I've often heard writers, actually not writers, people who want to be writers say, oh, I can't possibly read while I'm writing because I'm afraid that it will rub off on me and I'll start to read. And I always think, oh, how terrifying I might sound like Tolstoy or Chekhov or oh no. No, I don't think that, certainly I think when you start out writing, when anybody starts out writing, you start out imitatively. They're writers you admire and you start out consciously or unconsciously imitating those writers, but eventually you grow out of that and develop your own sensibility, really. So, and in terms of research for nonfiction books, fortunately, unfortunately, I don't have that great a memory, certainly not anymore. So I'm never worried about remembering too much. That doesn't happen. Like every writer, I had a great high school English teacher, but I had a really bad junior high school English teacher. I mean, she wasn't bad, she was probably great. I just didn't like her. And she assigned us to copy over word for word a short Chekhov story. It's the one where the guy's talking to the horse. He tells his horse the whole story. And so we had to copy it over, and we were all just in a rage about it. What a waste of our time, da 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 da. But actually, I think it was very useful. And in fact, when I was reading like a writer, in which there are huge blocks of quotes from other writers, and because I have no technological ability whatsoever, I couldn't figure out how to scan anything. So in some cases, I had to type whole pages of other writers into the manuscript. So, and I would notice that my writing got briefly better after I had literally copied, copying this 181-word sentence from Virginia Woolf, my writing sounded a little bit more like Virginia Woolf's afterwards, which is a good thing. So, so I think that can be very useful. I wish I read more. When I was a kid, that's all I did. That's, for years. And then when you're in college, if you're an English major, as I was, you'll have a week where you have to read 4 Victorian novels by the end of reading this huge amounts. Now, unfortunately, my life is so overwhelmingly crammed with stuff that it's very hard to find that time to just read for pleasure. And also because I still review quite a bit. Often the books I'm reading are books that I'm reading for work, really. But every so often I get a chance to read something, just to read something. I was traveling a lot in the spring, and I read Little Dorrit, Dickens' Little Dorrit, and I just loved it. I just couldn't believe it. A number of us were reading Little Dorrit, actually, friends of mine, because I guess there was a PBS series, there was a dramatization, and a couple of my friends said, oh, I don't really want to watch the TV show, let's read it. And, we don't have a reading group or anything, but just, people I knew were reading it. And a friend of mine said, who would have thought that Dickens has been underrated all this time? It was so great, and the joy of reading it was extraordinary. So, every so often that happens. I'm always shocked, and believe me, it happens more than you can imagine, to meet young writers, graduate students, who don't read, or don't read anything written before the last 50 years, or don't see why they should read the classics, and I just can't understand why they want to be writers. What would be the point, really? Yeah, how could I not? Well, although, the novelist Richard Price has this great thing that he says, or I heard him say, which was, people were always talking about the death of the novel, and he says, the novel will be around at our funeral. And it's true, there's still, I was just this weekend, I was at the Brooklyn Book Festival. It was jammed. There were hundreds of people there, people with baby strollers and readers and writers, and it was jammed. So clearly somebody is still reading. I can't figure out, there were, I guess there were a couple of musicians there. There were no movie stars that I noticed, so somebody had to be there to see writers. Well, just simply, I like writing both, but also I'm not, there's some writers, well, Philip Roth comes to mind, for example, who can, at this point, finish a novel and, as far as I can tell, start another novel, and with no decline in quality, really, who can just keep turning out these fabulous novels. But I can't do that. I need time after a novel, really, to write another novel, to even think about another novel. Nonfiction is great in that way, in that you don't need the same kind of inspiration, really. You can just write. And I like to write. I mean, I have to say, I like the act of writing. I like writing. So I'm able to keep writing without depending on all the sorts of things that you can't control. I mean, the imagination or all the things that go into a novel. You know, writing nonfiction, you have a certain amount of information, and you put that information together and tell a story as you would in a novel. But it's not. You can control it. I mean, you can pretty much always finish a work of nonfiction. I mean, I've stopped novels in the middle because they are not going anywhere. This has never happened to me with nonfiction. Well, unfortunately not. I mean, here I am. I'm not going to write today, but when I can, you know, for example, this summer I wrote every day, pretty much every day. You know, the summers are great. I mean, I can work in the garden and write. So over the summer I wrote every day, and if I could choose my life, I would be writing every day. But no one can really, or very few people can. So I actually have a life in addition to having a writing life, and there are various things that I have to do and want to do because of the life I'm living in addition to the writing life. So no, I don't. I wish I did. I used to be kind of snooty about it, and I used to say things like, "Well, I'm not that interested in myself," you know, or now I wish I did, because as I remember fewer and fewer things that happened to me, I wish I had this source that I could go to. Because often it happens that people will say, "Remember, we were having dinner at blah blah," and somebody said that, and it's as if it never happened. So I would like to have some reference to be able to go to, but no, I don't. I keep notebooks. Oh, sure. Yeah, and they're they range from just fascinating to inspirational. I mean, Chekhov's notebooks are great. Dostoevsky's notebooks are interesting. You know, his struggle to write Crime and Punishment is all in there. And then the letters. I mean, the letters of Flannery O'Connor are particularly amazing and inspirational because, you know, she was so ill for so much of her life, and her determination. I mean, there's this fantastic section where, what was it? Her mother persuades her, I think, to go to Lourdes to look for a cure, really, because she was so ill. And she goes to Lourdes, and I think prays for like her second novel to work out well. You know, so that kind of dedication, and her humor and her courage and her intelligence is all. Or Elizabeth Bishop's letters. You know, I mean, for one thing, you learn a great deal about the process of writing, and second, it's such an intimate connection with the writer. I was such a big reader when I was a kid, so it could have started anywhere. You know, Louisa May Alcott, maybe. Hans Christian Andersen, possibly. I remember very clearly reading Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, when I was maybe a couple of years out of college. And you know, my work is nothing like Garcia Marquez, obviously, but the sense of the pleasure of storytelling and how fun it would be to have a story in which things come back and reappear and plot turns and da-da-da had a huge effect on me. I thought, oh, that sounds like fun. Yeah, although, I mean, I have lots of friends who are writers who are around my age. So I think of us as a generation of writers just because we're writers and we're a generation. But I'm not sure, you know, maybe at some other time someone will say, oh yes, there's this connection among us. I mean, you are formed by the period during which you grew up. So there is a certain sensibility politically, even though this may not come out in the work, socially, again, it may not come out in the work, about how we view the world, that I think is a connection. But people's work, it's so different from you know, in a way that it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be completely unlike anyone else. That's kind of the point, really. I'll let you know when it happens. You know, it doesn't, I mean, you know, you were asking before about is there a generation of writers, and, you know, so forth. Well, one of the reasons that I feel so fortunate to have close friends who are writers is that we can, on some level, you know, the intensity of self-doubt and uncertainty. And, you know, a friend of mine says, well, you never know if anything's good until the last sentence of the last paragraph of the last draft. I mean, that, you know, and if you're writing a novel, let's say, you could be working for 4 years without anyone looking at what you're doing. So, so at some point, you know, I'll look at, every so often I'll look back at something I've done and say, oh yeah, I'm a writer, this is really good. But those moments are rare still. They're rare.